British ones. Okay. Choose from. Any other murder mysteries that real ones? Yeah. Well, we are involved in a lot of murder mysteries in Santa Clara County. My name is Jeremiah Garrido, and I apologize if I'm a little delayed. It's been one of those days, but this has been the highlight of my day to come here and share what we do in the crime lab.
Okay, I'd like to introduce you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry.
You can tell already it's going to be a wonderful presentation. Well, I want to welcome everybody to Community Currents. My name is Marion Shane, for those of you who have not met me before or, like me, forget names. Last year, we had Jamie Fields, and at that time, she was a police captain. Because of her outstanding abilities, she is now the chief of Los Gatos and also Monte Sereno. So certainly well-deserved. We just loved hearing her talk, and she was just so charming. I don't think of police people being as charming, but she certainly was, as well as being knowledgeable. Oh, you can hear okay? Good. All right. Future community currents. Tuesday, April 26th, we're going to have Matthew Udis, who is the mayor of Los Gatos. And I'm hoping that we have as many people turn out for that as we have here. And then on June 26th, we'll have a panel on mental health. Our minister here, Cindy McClement, I think is how you say it, is going to be in charge of that program. So it should be well worth attending, but both of them. Get this. Jerry Garrido is currently a criminologist assigned to the forensic biology unit at the Santa Clara County DA Crime Laboratory. His primary duties at the crime lab included assisting law enforcement in processing crime scenes for physical evidence and for forming forensic DNA analysis and providing expert witness testimony in court. Having a bit of a problem, my computer, the font is 10 and it refuses to change, so I had to write everything out. A little bit harder to see. He has provided analysis and testimony in various cases, including homicides, sexual assault investigations, property crimes, animal cruelty, and even solving cold cases. He holds a BS in forensic science and a BS in chemistry from University of New Haven in Connecticut. He is also an adjunct instructor of forensic science at San Jose University and also local colleges. We'll learn how science is used to decide guilt or innocence. So questions afterwards, I think probably would be the best thing. Okay, we're on.
I'm gonna repeat myself, but this is the highlight of my day to be here with everybody. Me and I can speak for Matt Riles, my one of my supervisors at the crime lab. So, one of but I'm proud of the work we do for the county here, and to be able to share it with you is an honor to be here. So thank you very much for having us here. And I not only speak for Matt and I, but I'm sure my lab director Ian Fitch too would also echo that. We are about 20 minutes from here, downtown San Jose, the county crime laboratory. It's a full service crime laboratory, which means we not only handle DNA, but firearms, electronic evidence. Since you all are murder mystery fans, or many of you, what can be physical evidence in a criminal investigation? Excellent. I heard blood, but somebody said everything or anything. Who mentioned that? Raise your hand. Ah, first prize. That is a big, big take home for any criminal investigation. Physical evidence can be anything. So, when you look at the services of the forensic lab in Santa Clara County, it is really designed to handle almost any type of physical evidence you can have in a criminal investigation. Now, we're not sworn officers, and it sounds like you had the chief of police for Los Gatos here last week. Amazing, nice, very, very nice. We are civilians, but by the root of our background is we're all scientists. My academic background is in chemistry and forensic science. So we'll kind of take you inside the crime lab and show you how we apply science to help solving crimes, and not just supporting people being prosecuted, but also exonerating people that are innocent, which is equally important. Okay? A lot of resources. We've come a long way. What do you think? When was this picture taken? There you go. So right here. All right. This is from a cold case. What's different about today in 2022? More technology. Yeah, we definitely have come a long way in the technology sense. Now, the way we approach a crime scene, the idea of what's evidence in 2022 is much different than 1950. Don't you agree? I mean, today we have advances like DNA testing, which, in 1950, what was the state of the art technology back in 1950? Okay, maybe fingerprints or blood type, exactly. The level of discrimination is very low. Now, we have DNA testing that will be able to not only find an individual, a specific individual, but potentially a family member as well. So powerful technology and color photos too, for sure. Somebody asked me a while back when I showed them this picture, they asked me if I took this picture, and I thought, no, that wasn't me. We've seen through our, all of our lifetimes, some monumental cases, haven't we? I mean, what is the phrase that goes along with this? All right, maybe, absolutely. I was going to have us all in unison. If the glove doesn't fit, that was Johnny Cochran's, if you all remember the trial, the phrase that he came up with, that was monumental in that case. He knew the gloves weren't going to fit. The defense team, the brilliant defense team knew that. He didn't take his any ibuprofen that he usually would take. His hands were swollen. Plus the gloves were not in any condition that they were going to fit. We saw the forensics of this play out in court, which were kind of jumbled a little bit. This was, I think, for me, the first time I had seen forensic DNA testimony on that stage, and I think a lot of us can remember back, but monumental case. For California, we've seen some amazing high profile cases like Scott Peterson. I mean, this is right in our backyard. Oh, this is the, okay.
Test.
Okay.
Let's see. If not, you can take it with you.
Yeah, I'll take it with me. Let me see if I can, okay, perfect. But we've seen a lot of high profile cases in California alone. And, when we look specifically at Santa Clara County, we have had enormous challenges and high profile cases in our county as well. But over time, I mean, you look at John Benet Ramsey case, that was one of the highest profile unsolved child death cases of our time. And, a lot of people look to the science, to help solve these. And just a few, for the sake of time, I may skip through a couple slides here. And we in California have seen not only this case solved by familial DNA analysis, but also this case. And does anybody know what case this is referring to? This is a serial killer named Joseph James DeAngelo, who was sentenced to life in prison about maybe 2 years ago in Sacramento. He's named as the Golden State Killer. And so enormous, criminal history, and law enforcement and the crime laboratory, Department of Justice, had his DNA in CODIS, the criminal DNA database, for decades. He eluded law enforcement for decades. How? He had never been arrested after he had committed all these crimes. Because if he was, at least for a felony, and convicted, his DNA would have been sampled and it would have hit on a profile from the 70s. But that never happened. Now, about maybe 5 years ago, investigators for this case, a team of investigators from Sacramento to Contra Costa to Central California to Southern California, they got together and they said, look, we have DNA of a killer, but we don't know who it is. So what they had done is genetic genealogy. And so ancestry kind of testing. And when they did that, they were able to find what turned out to be a third cousin of Joseph James DeAngelo. And they kind of worked backwards and then ended up collecting following him and surveilling him, and ended up getting a sample from what they believe to be, the Golden State Killer. So one of the most prolific, serial killers that we've seen here. And I kind of talked about my background, like for the sake of time, I won't really say a whole lot. And I thank you for the intro. I will say this. Since I started in DNA testing about 20 years ago, first I'll say I had more hair. I definitely had more, but the amount of DNA that I had to work with back then was it had to be a lot. We needed a lot of DNA to work with. Nowadays in 2022, we need cells, only a few cells, because technology is advanced. Because we can work with less DNA, guess what? More opportunity to work cases. Yeah, I agree. More opportunity to work cases that we wouldn't normally work. Today I'm going to share with you an animal cruelty case of all cases that we ended up helping solve through DNA testing. And to me, this is one of the greatest cases I could show you to highlight how technology is advanced, because we used some of the resources we've used for homicides against humans. We use that same technology for a situation that went on in San Jose, where somebody out there was finding pets, domestic cats, and basically killing them. Many pets, from 20 to 30 or more. And it was a very big public safety consideration at first, because serial killers, they start out in doing that. So, we work a lot of different cases in the crime lab in general. Like I said, full service lab. From my perspective on the DNA side of things, I just found it interesting. We work way more than just violent crimes. A lot of property crimes, whatever is going to be in the interest of public safety there. This is actually a movie clip from CSI on TV. Has anybody seen CSI on TV? Yeah. What's the difference between real world and CSI? What do you think? Okay, time. Yeah, they usually solve cases in how long?
1 hour.
About 1 hour. Matt, have you solved a case in 1 hour? Well, it's not likely. I mean, we may be able to do some examinations but yeah, I am really impressed with the people on CSI. They have all the fancy equipment that we don't have, and they have all their hair too. Sorry, I'm a little bitter. My title is criminalist. So, what does a criminalist do? Well, like I said, we're not sworn police officers. My main duties include going out, responding to crime scenes with law enforcement, assisting them. So I may be collecting evidence at the scene. I may be examining physical evidence at the laboratory when police bring me the evidence, and then analyzing that evidence back at the lab. Okay, so we're going to go inside the crime lab and the different units and the criminalists assigned to these different units. There's an enormous amount of resources in each unit. But the bottom line is criminalists will write the report and then finally, testify to that report in court. And that's really where the rubber meets the road, when we're in court. Making sure the jury understands, what conclusions we obtained, making sure the science goes through kind of the rigorous, defense, contesting. So, that's kind of in a nutshell, the main duties in for my job as a criminalist. We are fortunate here in Santa Clara County that we're under the office or umbrella of the district attorney's office, Jeff Rosen. And in 2009, we moved into a brand new 100,000 square foot crime lab. So very, very thankful to be working in this building. Matt and I worked in the basement of one county building since, when we started. So now we have windows. Hey, I'll take that. But it's an absolute beautiful building. Like I said, 100,000 square feet. And from, I mentioned DNA a lot, but I mean, from trace evidence to toxicology to firearms, as I mentioned, to Matt, help me out. Fingerprints, controlled substances. See, thank you. Digital evidence. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this. This is Guadalupe and Heading, right downtown there, and right near the courthouse. You would never know it's a forensic lab. There's no, sign on it or anything, but it is a very nice building. We have kind of some different positions in there. And again, if I'll probably skip over this a little bit, given the audience, I want to kind of focus on more of what we're doing in there. But this is kind of what the structure is as far as positions from management to the bench level criminals like myself, justice system clerks, and all of these individuals. I mean, when you look at what we're doing in that crime lab, from assisting, cases being solved, it's a big team effort. From the scene to the lab, there's a lot of people that work on these cases, and we're very fortunate that we have a lot of resources there. And like I said, we're scientists by trade or academically at least. So this is pretty much a lot of the background of the criminalists there. Forensic science is pretty broad. When you look at, somebody said, I think physical evidence can be what? Can be everything, can be anything. So forensic science is kind of a broad term to describe the application of science to law. If we're talking about bloodstain pattern interpretation, heavily relies on physics, fluid dynamics, mathematics. If we're talking about, obviously, with DNA, we're applying techniques that have been used for genetic research to analyze physical evidence. So, we look at pathology, forensic pathology, anthropology, entomology. What does an entomologist look at? All right, Bugs, there was a quiz. I might be quizzing you along the way. All right. But again, it's a team effort sometimes when we work on cases. And, we can't lose if we're working together here. Like in a case like this, and this was a while back. It wasn't my case, but I thought it was kind of just interesting introduction where we had a hiker it may have been in the Los Gatos, or Santa Cruz Mountains rather, where they were hiking with their dog. The dog came back with a femur bone in its mouth. And the individual that was hiking with his dog was a retired police officer, and went to around where the dog got the bone and ended up recovering a human skeleton. Actually part of a human skeleton. We worked with Dr. Lorna Pierce, who is a forensic anthropologist at Santa Clara University. Again, we worked with the sheriff's office, and then we collected some of the bones for DNA testing and identified. This is somebody who went missing about 15 to 20 years ago. The sister of the victim reported her missing, and because she gave a DNA sample, we were able to kind of match everything up. But the take home is it's a team effort. Forensics spans so many different fields and forensic disciplines. In kind of summary, what we're doing in a criminal investigation, what does STEAM stand for? This actually, I apologize. This is something I gave for a school one time, and STEAM stands for what? Science, technology, engineering. They threw art in there and math. So, but ultimately, we're analyzing all this evidence, to help prove or disprove investigative theories. We work closely with law enforcement and the district attorney's office, but sometimes we've worked with, I've been called by the defense. So that's important. And I definitely, I applaud Jeff Rosen, the DA, because since I've been working at the crime lab, and he's always kind of maintained a good relationship with the defense community and the lab. But ultimately providing legal proof in the judicial system. What's the difference between witness statements and physical evidence?
One is more incontrovertible.
Okay. One might be more reliable historically. Do people, they might see something incorrectly because of the trauma of a crime. There have been cases where people have lied. So physical evidence really, as legal proof, very, very strong, very powerful. Assist in development of suspects. This is one thing that over the past, I would say 10, 15 years has really evolved, with DNA databases, with databases for fingerprints, in firearms. Matt's background, Matt, tell him your background real quick. What's your forensic discipline?
So my background is in firearms examination. I do examinations to see if a bullet was fired by a gun.
Yeah, he has the neat job. He has a really cool job. But firearms has even their own database. So, we rely on databases a lot throughout the crime lab, from DNA to firearms, to fingerprints, to shoe prints. And it's all in hopes to assist in development of possible suspects. And then reconstruction. I'm not a big TV watcher, but has anybody seen Dexter before? What does Dexter work on? Yeah, blood spatter. Okay, so my college students always, they always ask me when we talk about blood spatter interpretation, hey, have you seen Dexter? I haven't seen it, but I know he's a bloodstain pattern person there. But yeah, and a serial killer. That's what I'm still wondering, because I haven't seen it. Is he a good guy or a bad guy? He sounds like he's a serial killer, so it doesn't sound too good. But reconstruction is something that you watch on TV, and they do it very easily, and that is an enormous task to reconstruct the sequence of events. We spend a lot of time, and Matt within the firearms unit, they with trajectories spend a tremendous amount of time on reconstruction and finding a bullet path, position of shooters. And very serious cases like officer involved shootings. When an officer takes somebody's life, that is probably one of the most sensitive cases that comes through the lab. And in reconstruction, also blood spatter, we spent a lot of time reconstructing. So let's talk about some cases where this science is applied. And, hopefully this makes sense. This is actually somewhat of a local case. This is a Los Gatos Monte Sereno case that happened in 2012. And Ravi Kumra, Ravi Kumra was unfortunately involved in drugs and, would have prostitutes or escorts over to the estate. Unfortunately, one of the, in that lifestyle, sadly, his wife was victimized. She lived, but there was a robbery. Okay, so a home invasion robbery. About 4 people broke into his home, bound him with duct tape, and his wife. Now, had been going through a divorce. They were living in the same house, but unfortunately, as I said, addiction and his life was kind of turned upside down. However, when the 4 people came in and broke in to steal things from his estate, they bound him with duct tape, and actually he ended up suffocating that night. Okay, so it was a chaotic scene. Police responded because the female victim, his estranged wife, called police, and they arrived on scene. Paramedics followed, and to basically assess his vital signs, what did they use? What did they put on his finger? Yeah, the pulse oximeter. So they actually used that, and they put that on his finger, the paramedics, okay, and they established there's no pulse, no oxygen saturation. They actually did a few other examinations and pronounced him deceased at that scene. So we have an active homicide scene, home invasion robbery. There's a female victim that's on her way to the hospital, very traumatized. And now you have male victim that is unconscious, deceased. Okay. Got to follow closely because this is a really, really interesting case. Now, at the medical examiner's office, yet another discipline, another professional that we interact with, the medical examiner collected samples from this individual, clothing. He was bound with duct tape, so they collected duct tape. And we ended up getting, in addition to the duct tape and clothing, his fingernail clippings. Okay, so that's often standard practice at the medical examiner's office. In a case like this, they'll collect the fingernail clippings. Why is that? Why would fingernails? If there is a stroke, exactly, there may be tissue or some kind of DNA under the nails of the victim. So they collected that, and the laboratory, we got a 3-person DNA mixture. Who was in there? Who do you think?
Well, his wife would be one.
Okay, his wife,
Himself.
excellent. So now if we remove him, his wife from this mixture of 3 people, guess what? We have 1 person left. That person is, we don't know. It's an unknown male DNA profile. We search in the DNA database. And guess what? It comes back to a guy named Lucas Anderson. So Lucas Anderson serves 5 months, and then it's realized he was never in that crime scene. He had never known the victim of that crime scene. He was never there that night. And the big question came up, how do you get an innocent man's DNA at a murder scene? They asked Lucas Anderson, detective at the time in Los Gatos, where were you that night? Lucas Anderson says, I don't know. I don't remember that night. Do you know the victim? He says, I don't know these people. Where do you live? Well, he's a transient that lives downtown San Jose. How does a transient that lives downtown San Jose get mixed up in this case? Does he supply drugs to the victim? Does he know some of the women that the victim knows? And it turns out he has no association with the victim. How do you get his DNA under the fingernails of the victim? Well, good guess. Good guess. It wasn't a twin brother, but this is the only connection between Lucas Anderson and that crime scene. Contamination. What, you're on the right track. What was it with? The pulse oximeter. It turns out when Lucas Anderson was questioned very more thoroughly by the by the detective and the defense attorney, it was realized Lucas Anderson, the night of the home invasion robbery, murder, was in the hospital. So 2 hours before the home invasion, guess what? He had a medical distress. Paramedics, a two-man ambulance crew treated him, and then 2 hours later, who did they treat? This guy. Transferring the innocent man's DNA to the murder scene through the pulse oximeter. Yeah. So there's a few big learning lessons for the lab and for forensic science. Number one, every contact leaves a trace. In addition to physical evidence can be anything. We really have to think, every contact leaves a trace. We also have to train the medical professionals, paramedics that respond to these scenes to make sure they do what? Clean off their equipment. Okay, so that was a very surprising case. He was arrested a week later, and nobody knew at that time he had been in the hospital until medical records showed he actually was in there. But he couldn't have actually been at that scene because he was at the hospital 12 hours after the victim was killed. So very interesting case there. A very quick rundown. Let's see. What time should I go to before questions?
Well, you have to give us some more cases.
Okay, coming right up. But I mentioned a full service. I just wanted to give you a visual of some of the different units here. Trace evidence, highly reliant on the principle that every contact leaves a trace. Highly transient. Whether it's hairs, fibers, glass, soil. This can be easily transferred from the scene to the suspect, and also in addition to the victim. So paint in hit and run cases, a lot of different ways, gunshot residue in shootings. The oldest, most well-known forensic method out there, I think fingerprints. And we don't need too much fancy equipment for dusting or development of fingerprints, although we do have chemical dye stains. We have super glue fuming tanks and chambers. So we spend a lot of time on developing fingerprints from various items. This is a ransom note right here, developed with a chemical called ninhydrin, and we can go way beyond just powder, with something like this. And I think in fingerprints, it's kind of similar to DNA in a sense, where we have a variety of different evidence we see, from paper that you see here to, duct tape, for example. But fingerprints, we're doing a lot of the development and then taking digital images. Controlled substances, as Matt said earlier, this is something that I consider controlled substances and toxicology kind of the workhorse of the lab. They're handling a lot of solid dose powders or drugs that are seized by law enforcement. And toxicology, analyzing blood, urine for any drugs that have been metabolized. I think toxicology gets probably the most notoriety or is in the news the most when you have a celebrity death, like Michael Jackson or, Prince. That typically, from when I ever hear about some celebrity deaths, it's always, all right, we're waiting on the toxicology, something like that. But a tremendous amount of samples come through our lab. I should probably hand this over to Matt here, since he's a firearms expert. But as he said, they're doing a tremendous amount of comparisons with projectiles that are fired or bullets that are recovered from, whether it's drive-by shootings, any type of shooting scene. Microscopy or microscopes heavily relied on in that unit. They do serial number restoration, distance determination to try to figure out, okay, how far was the muzzle to the target? What else? What am I missing here? I mentioned the database. They have a database that will allow them to see if a firearm was used in another jurisdiction. Maybe another city. If we have a drive-by shooting here that happens in our county, we could actually take high resolution images of the markings on the cartridge casing and then search that to see if it was used in Sacramento, Oakland, Salinas, or even potentially in another state. As I mentioned, distance determination. In this case, the reporting party said his wife was 6 feet away when the gun accidentally discharged. There's your murder mystery. Okay, so when investigators got to the scene, they looked at the victim here and the injury, and it's a little bit hard to see here, but what is all of this here? That's all powder burns. Who mentioned that? Okay, excellent. All right, we have if I had a badge, you would get it. You would get it. All right, but powder burn. So the question came up: how do you get that if it was 6 feet away, like the reporting party said? This was a tragic accident. That's what the reporting party said. That's more consistent with less than 6 feet. So now what do we have to do at the crime lab? What does Matt have to do? Well, hey, Matt on his own can handle this. What would you do, Matt? Since we have him here.
I would get it done and almost have panels at different distances.
Perfect. Yeah, so test fires. He'd basically do a sequence of test fires from various lengths, so up against the surface, and they've used, I went down to the firearms unit, they were using cloth, sometimes they've used pig skin, but the idea here is to create some kind of, pattern that's similar to that in a sense. And at 6 feet, did you see something like that? You only saw a bullet hole at 6 feet. How about close contact like this, up against the surface? Do you see that? You don't, because a lot of that would, go into the wound. If you back up 1 inch, and do this experiment. If you back up 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, the firearms unit, if I'm not mistaken, identified the range, the distance from the muzzle to target approximately 1 to 3 inches based on the way that was. So the guy ended up confessing and made up that story. Okay, that is still on. Trajectories, as we mentioned earlier, and Matt, you gave me a good link there, and I'll have to put that in a different presentation. Electronic evidence. Who has a cell phone? Woo. I mean, there's very little in 2022, and Matt can probably chime in here too. there's very few cases that come through the crime lab, criminal investigations that don't have an electronic component. I mean, from not only phones, but anybody have a wearable device, So yeah, I mean, and Ring doorbell cameras, Alexa, all these digital devices that can be, important. Security video. This is kind of interesting with CSI on TV. They always make it seem like they can make the video perfect, and it's not like that in real life. Sometimes we get video that was recorded a crime and we can't really enhance it. Like this case. I mean, this was a while back now, but the detective asked us to take a look at this car right here. And we zoomed in on it. And they wanted to see that not only the type of car that is, but the driver inside. And we thought, wow, that's, but he was excited that we were able to get this. So we zoomed in a little more. And then he asked us, and I thought he was joking, for the license plate. So we zoomed in a little more. Can you start to see the license plate? No? That's the license plate. That's as far as you can zoom in with a film editing software that the crime lab uses. But that's it. On TV, how are they able to do this on TV? How does it come out? Perfect. It's like that, just like that. Okay. Question documents section. If somebody, although a lot of things are typed nowadays on computer, but if things are altered or there's obliterations, actually our lab isn't doing this right now, but historically we've been able to either do handwriting comparisons or even deal with recover indented handwriting. What do I mean by that? You're on the right track. Excellent. Excellent. So if you are writing something on the first page of a notepad, the indentions are created on the page underneath. So, that we spend time, recovering those indentions in certain cases there. I kind of mentioned DNA testing already, but I think this is, a good case to highlight here. This pit bull at the time was 4 years old. Her name is Maya. She's very protective of her owner, and her owner was attacked in the house, okay, at about 5 a.m. When the dog woke up and heard this in the kitchen, the dog immediately saw the suspect on top of the victim, the dog's owner. And what did the dog do? Dog bit the suspect who was on top of its owner. So suspect ends up running out of the house. 2 rookie police officers showed up at the crime scene because the husband of the victim was up. The family was up at that time and very scared. Police officers were greeted by the dog how? Yeah, very, very, yeah. The dog was showing its teeth, not happy. Hair was standing up on its back. Well, these 2 rookie police officers, what did they notice in the dog's mouth? They noticed possible blood in the dog's mouth. With the help of the owner and about 10 swabs, because the dog kept eating them, they swabbed the inside of the dog's mouth. And the swabs came to the crime lab. We ended up getting a DNA profile and put that profile in the database, and it hit to somebody. So really, and lastly, I'll finish with this case here. This is a case that I alluded to early on in the beginning. I had never worked a case like this before, where you had basically somebody killing pets in this one area of San Jose. This was a big team effort. It was veterinarian services for the city of San Jose. Dr. Sharon Osterman, she did an examination of all these cats that had been found in the neighborhood, very horrific. You had the DA's office. You had a scientist at UC Davis assisting us, and the crime lab. So it was a big team effort. Ultimately, here, let me see if I can play this. This will kind of describe it a little better than I can here. Let's see. Well, this is just describing, let's see if I can actually, that's a good idea if I hold the mic up to that. Just make the,
We're actively looking for a cat killer in the Cambrian
Maybe not.
district of San Jose. This after able to
Oh.
lead a series of stories this week on cats.
I'll just fast forward it. So there's a video of somebody taking somebody's cat. Individual, whoever this was in the Cambrian area of San Jose. And shortly after this video was submitted to police, they found somebody sleeping in their car in the Home Depot parking lot. There was a bunch of, this is about 2 a.m. They had their flashlight looking into the car. There was hair all over the inside of the car. What else was there inside the car? There was blood. There was cat collars. I mean, a lot of evidence that this is possibly the person doing this in the neighborhood. When they got this guy out of the car, what did he have all over him? He had cat hair, but what else on his skin? Scratches. So these cats fought for their life in this car. And ultimately, I worked with, and a couple other criminals worked with the vet in San Jose to collect the nails from each of the cats. And when we did DNA testing on the nails from each of these cats that were found in the neighborhood, guess what? They came back to one human male DNA profile. So this individual, this is probably one of the biggest animal cruelty sentences in the county. I'd have to fact check myself on that. But I mean, 16-year sentence. Over 20 cats. So, and this was some of the work that UC Davis, we worked with them, to determine some of that too. So that is a small fraction of the cases, but like I said, I want to thank you guys for having us.
Well, let's have a question time.
Yes, absolutely.
Is there someone who is athletic that is willing to take this around? Okay. Okay, any questions? Raise your hand. When you're trying to make a case
Mhm.
for the county, are other kinds of evidence like hair or other things, are they equally as satisfactory for the defense?
Yes, I mean, what we tried to do is, at least in the DNA unit and in other disciplines too. I mean, if the defense wants to retest anything, they're welcome to that. And all of the defense basically gets all of our work, our notes, our bench notes, so they'll know if there's leftover material, if there's hairs or something that they they think need to be tested. We'll actually either test it ourselves or we'll, send it out to a lab to be tested. So it's a good question. So does that help or? Yes. Right. And if the defendant wanted that retested to confirm our results, they certainly could do that. And we've had defense teams actually do that. We've had death penalty cases like Sierra Lamar, the Sierra Lamar case, which was a big case, and a couple other ones where the defense actually they needed to do that. So fortunately, everything came out the same. But that is part of the job, where our work is under a lot of well, it takes a lot of people, that's for sure. Any other questions?
About how does it take to run and see?
Good question. I get that question a lot. So in 2022, if I was to have one sample and do DNA testing on that one sample, I could get one sample done in about, let's see, to extract or DNA from the cells, it would take me about, I would say, an hour and a half. The second step is to see how much human DNA is in that sample. That would take, let's say, another hour and a half. To make copies of the DNA, like a Xerox machine, that would take, let's say, 2 hours. To actually get a profile, that would take another, I would say, 2 hours. So the time consuming part is the documentation that comes along with it. And typically cases are so 24 hours is, we've had cases where we've performed DNA testing in 24 hours, which is very fast.
I've heard the what's that about?
Yeah, especially in DNA testing, we look at about 24 different markers or locations within somebody's DNA. So the more markers we have, the more discriminating DNA analysis is, if that makes sense. So like I said, if I have a profile from, let's say, a cigarette butt at a crime scene, and I get a DNA profile of 24, a full profile of 24 markers, and I compare that to a suspect, then that's pretty strong evidence, because the probability of somebody else having that same DNA profile is 1 in 5 quintillion people.
Okay.
Some big number.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do you do autopsies?
No, I do not. I do not. There have been times where we've worked with the medical examiner to collect some evidence in the autopsy room, but it's very rare. Usually they'll collect evidence and submit it to the lab. Yeah, good question.
So if you did have a cigarette butt, if you do have a cigarette butt, how in the heck do you get DNA off of it?
Good question. So what we'll do is take a cutting of the filter, where somebody would actually put their lips on it, and then put it inside a centrifuge tube or a small tube, add some chemicals to extract the DNA from the cells, and then kind of go through that same process. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really a series of chemicals and heat, and then the third step is the monumental step where we're making copies inside a tube, billions of copies inside a tube. And that was a big game changer in forensics, because before that, we were limited by how much DNA we had at the scene. But I'm going to give you some history, a little history. 1985, a guy by the name of Kary Mullis won the Nobel Prize for a reaction called PCR. And this, it was actually a dream, he said he had, where you're basically replicating DNA in a tube with some chemicals, similar to how the body does. So that was a game changer, because now I can have a couple cells and make DNA in the tube versus, back before PCR, I needed a blood stain the size of a quarter to get any results. And they were pretty weak results. Good question. That was a long answer, sorry. And then a question up here, sir? Oh, okay. Anything else?
A lot of us, this is a little off, but a lot of us have to have our fingerprints different volunteer or work units. Did those DNA samples that the FBI and everybody else seems to want
Right.
get on file?
So for something like that, we just do development, and then the police department would be searching fingerprints that we've developed. But from my understanding, and maybe Matt has more knowledge of this, he probably does. They would be searching a criminal database called APHIS, but I don't think that would incorporate, DMV or some other things like that. It would be more searching fingerprints against unsolved cases where there's fingerprints or convicted offenders. So I'm pretty sure that law enforcement, if they wanted to, they might be able to search that, but I'm not sure on that. Maybe not.
For fingerprints that you're providing for volunteer or something like that, those might get searched against like a criminal database or something to find out if you have a criminal history. I can't really say to that extent, but they're not entered or kept.
Ah,
in that database.
okay.
They may not even be kept at all. They may just be one-time use in that.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering, because if you volunteer for several different organizations and your place of business, they all want their own form. And I thought.
That's a great point. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it may be, Matt, you might be right. It's a one-time thing. And then,
I know, it definitely knows the one-time thing as far as they purchase against already existing criminal database. That you search.
Question, can you get DNA?
that's a good question. I don't know if, I know there have been studies to do DNA testing off fingerprints that people have left on glasses, like a drinking glass or something like that. But I don't know if anybody's tried, a 10 print card where you would actually leave your inked fingerprint. That's a great question. Yeah, that's very interesting. We'll have to do some more study research. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, it's my pleasure. Our pleasure.
Well, now you can check and see if they're doing the information on the mysteries correctly.
That's right.
Remember the coming forum parts that we're having? April 26th, which I realize is a long way off, but watch for it, for Matthew Udis, our mayor, and then also for the panel on mental health, which is going to be June 26th. And thank you all so much for coming. It really gives a good feeling to know there's that much interest in setting up these programs. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I could take it. Oh.
I was concerned about that.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Yeah, okay, good. Well, I'm glad.
Careful what you do around